Well, hi there. Welcome. I'm Shane, and this is the David Brown 990 that we've been working on over the past several videos. We're doing a series here if you're new. And today we'll be going through what's known as the Group 3 adjustments. That's adjusting the cam plate inside of here, the connecting nut on the front of the quadrant lever, the return spring right here, the friction disc that provides tension to the lever over there, and finally we'll be doing the sensing cable right there. Those are what's known as the Group 3 adjustments. We'll be using the techniques described on the David Brown Tractor Club website that were written by Carl Kohlberg, better known as Ollek, on the old David Brown forums. And we'll be going through all of that, and hopefully these hydraulics work. We've been doing a lot of work on them, and it's time to see if all that work pays off. So stay with me. Let's go through and talk about the manuals for a few minutes. This is the V service manual that you can get from the Google Drive that's got all the manuals associated with it. I'm going to flip over here to the adjustments. The instructions on the David Brown Tractor Club website actually categorizes the adjustments that you do to these tractors into 3 groups. The first group of adjustments is done with this valve chest separated from the right-hand ramshaft bracket. As described on the David Brown Tractor Club website, it's setting the spool valve, which you've seen me do a couple of times in past videos, and setting the TCU valve, which I did not do. I'm assuming mine's good, and we're going to find out once I do these adjustments if I'm right there or not. Rolling the dice there. So these are the Group 1 settings. Group 2 settings are the settings that you do with the valve chest reattached to the right-hand ramshaft bracket but still out of the tractor. These are setting the abutment plate and setting the TCU valve screw. That's the Group 2 adjustments. I did setting the abutment plate and I skipped setting the TCU valve screw because, again, I think it's fine. The Group 3 adjustments are the ones that you do with everything bolted back to the tractor. These include setting the ramshaft cam, setting the connecting link, bleeding the system, setting the quadrant spring, setting the sensing unit cable. Now, the David Brown Tractor Club website instructions are a little bit different from what you see in the manual, particularly in the area of setting the connecting link right here. I've got those instructions printed out, and I 3-hole punch them, and I put them in my service manual right between these 2 sets of Group 3 adjustments, so I know where they are. The David Brown Tractor Club instructions supersede what's in the manual, in my opinion. So these adjustments are basically the same for most of it for Group 1 and Group 2 settings that are in the service manual. Then it gets into Group 3, and really the big variance is around adjusting the nut for the connecting rod. I don't know if you can see it or not, but this is really blurry and the paragraphs tend to run together. I'm not hating on what's on the David Brown Tractor Club website, but this was hard to read for me. So what I did was I rewrote the Group 3 adjustments, and these are available online. There's a link down in the description to this document. This is the Group 3 adjustments that I rewrote. Basically put it into a kind of a paragraph form and kind of separated the sentences out a little bit so you can follow it better. But it's basically exactly the same content as what Ollek wrote. Adjusting the cam plate, adjusting the nut for the connecting rod, adjusting return spring, adjusting the friction disc, and adjusting the depth control cable. All I did here was basically rewrite it into a more readable form. And again, it is available down there in the description. There's a link. So in this video, assuming that I can get the connecting rod adjusted right and the linkages raised, I'm actually going to stop right there and test everything to make sure that the arms will lower as well. Because remember, if you've been watching the series up to now, the issue with my tractor here is that the arms would not lower. This point right here is where the rubber meets the road for me. I'm going to do it first with Ollek's method here, but then, just for giggles, I'm also going to be doing 2 other methods. I'm going to back the connecting link back off, assuming it works, and do it again using the service manual technique. It is basically 2 different variants. I'll be doing both. One is using your fingers to feel the spool valve. The other is using a dial indicator to look for movement on top of the spool valve. We'll cover those in a little while, hopefully, if I can get it working. So my intention here is to do all 3 methods. Ollek's method for adjusting the connecting rod, and the service manual 2 variations for that, using your finger and using a dial indicator. So we'll see what happens. Let's get to it. We'll start by adjusting the cam plate. All right, these adjustments have to be done in order, and the first one is adjusting the cam plate. Raise the linkage by hand and engage the mechanical lift lock. All right, and to get some access here, we're going to move this up and out of the way. You know, I did go ahead and grease it, and I should have waited until I had done all these adjustments, because this is kind of nasty up in here. All right, if your nuts are not already loose, go ahead and loosen them. You don't take them off, you just want it loose so the cam plate can move. There is a small notch at the end of the cam plate. Somewhere down in here, there's a little bit of a notch or a divot in the cam plate itself. That divot has got to ride on top of this height control when the arms are in the upright and locked position. To turn the cam plate, or to move it, just use a little punch, 1/8 inch punch. It'll fit right in that hole right there, and will allow you to move the cam plate just like that. You can move it too far to where it's off of the height control roller. Right there is that divot or that notch, right? So right there is where it needs to be. Lock the cam plate in position with the 2 nuts when you feel that the roller drops in that notch. There we go. And there we go. Those 2 lock nuts are now tight. Okay, the cam plate has now been adjusted. The notch is in the right spot on top of the height control roller. This is the easiest one to do. For the rest of the adjustments here for this tractor, you've got to make sure the tractor has oil in it, which I've already filled it back up. It's at the right level on the dipstick. And you've got to make sure that you crank the tractor and you have oil coming out of the valve chest. You should see a steady stream of oil coming out the right side over here. So crank up the tractor and wait for it to come up. If you've done work, if you've had your pump out inside the PTO housing here or anything like that, it may take a while for oil to get back up through to here. So be patient. All right, we're in neutral. The nut for the connecting link is at the end, and I've got the quadrant lever back here, basically in a hold position. All right. Can I get a contact? You see I've got good oil flow out the back, out of the side of the valve chest right there. They're in good shape. Just let it run for a while, it'll bleed itself out. All right, make sure that your arms are all the way down. For any of the methods that you use for setting the connecting link, the selector here needs to be in the TCU mode, is all the way over to the right. And if you need to change it, remember, pull back on the control lever all the way into select before you actually make a selection on the selector up here. Make sure you're in TCU mode. Make sure the connecting nut on the front of the inside the quadrant housing is at the end of the connecting rod. Loosen the return carrier spring nut right here and move the return spring all the way back fully in the slot. All the way back. Pull the control lever fully back in the quadrant and push the lever 10 millimeters forward from that rearmost position and keep the lever in that position. What I did was I measured up 10 millimeters from the edge of the, from the end of the handle there up to about 10 millimeters and made a mark. For me, it's right at the edge of the S and select. That's 10 millimeters. So what you want to do is hold it in that position right there. And to do that, I use a rope. And I put that rope right there around that reflector. Holds it just fine. Okay, that's good. To give it a little help, I'm going to tighten up the nut for the friction washer so that the lever doesn't move. All right, once you've got the control lever in the right spot and the selector in the TCU mode, you are ready to crank the tractor and perform the rest of Ollek's instructions here. All right, folks, this is where the rubber meets the road for me. All the work that I've done to clean up everything inside, get the valve chest cleaned up, unstuck. This is where I find out if all of that worked out properly. If I did the settings right, if I adjusted the spool valve right, I got everything attached right. This is where you find out everything, right here. All right, let's get this party started. Slow and steady wins the race here. Screw it in until the linkage just starts to rise. Hopefully it rises. Oh, we're rising. Good. Spool valve is adjusted right. Back it off a little bit. Go back into idle. I hear the engine bogging down a little bit. I can hear it. All right, with it sitting in this position, I'm going to test it real quick to see what happens. We'll take the rope off, loosen the friction nut a little bit, so I can move the control lever. And I'm going to put it into lower on the TCU mode and see if the links will lower. We're going down. Yay! All right, rope is off. I'm in a lower mode on TCU. We're going to see if it'll raise. I got some weights on that arm over there. Yes, we got it fixed. Folks, you don't know how happy I am about that. Just to restate, the problem with this one was, as soon as you turn the tractor on, the arms would rise straight up and they would not go down no matter what. You basically had to wait for leakage to leak them down over a few days. But that's now fixed. All right, now that we know that everything works properly, we can experiment a little bit, show some things, maybe. We'll try it anyway. The service manual describes a technique for setting the connecting link, and I'm going to try that. The first one is using your finger to test whether, flicking between height and TCU mode, feeling to when the spool valve quits moving. When you flick it between height control and TCU, the spool valve will kick a little bit or move up and down. And the manual describes a way to adjust the connecting nut where that movement just ceases when you're flipping it back and forth between height and TCU mode. We're going to do that. I'm going to see how it works. And I'm going to compare the position of the connecting link nut in that position. I'm also going to be using the technique of using a dial indicator on the spool valve itself. This tractor has a hole on the top of the axle right over the spool valve where you can set a dial indicator down on top of the spool valve. This early to mid 70s model, and we're going to see if we can check the adjustment that way as well. So stay tuned. Now, how am I going to set up the video? This is the question. You're not going to be able to see me feel the spool valve. You're just going to have to take my word for it. I'm going to take the rope up here and get it situated. I'm going to put it at the same spot I did for the listening technique. 10 millimeters forward. And I'm going to tighten the friction disc nut a little bit to help it. Okay. And we're going to back off the connecting link nut. How many of you are going, no, it was just working. Why are you showing us this? Well, because I want to test and experiment. I know I can get it back to where it was if this doesn't work. Get this thing screwed in. A little ways. We know about how far it goes in. All right, let's try right there. All right, how am I going to test this? I can't get my finger. I can't get the pad part of my finger on top of it. I got big fingers or fat fingers. Ooh, I can get my fingernail on top of it. Okay. So I can get my fingernail on top of the spool valve. Interesting. Okay. All right, let's flip it between TCU and height and see if I feel anything. Ooh, I do. I can feel it moving up and down. That's interesting. Huh. Okay, so adjust it in to where movement just ceases. Okay. Still moving. You still feel it. It might be too far. We'll see. Nope. Well. Nope, I can't feel it. I'm going to back off a hair. Oh, I can feel it. That's just barely perceptible on my fingernail. Let's tighten it in just a bit more. We're almost at the same place we were on the threads as listening for it. All right, there's no movement right there. A little movement there. I'm right there on it. Okay. Tighten to where movement just ceases. That's where I've got it. Let's test it out. Let's loosen up a friction nut. Okay. All right, this is moving now good. I'm going to put it in the lower position for TCU, which is not all the way forward, but it's about right there. All right. Still in neutral. And it lowers. Try TCU mode. All the way forward. Yep, that works. Let's try height control. All right, so we've done it with the listening technique and got it working. Raises, lowers. We've done it with the service manual technique of feeling it with your finger. It raises and lowers. Now we're going to do the third technique. It's still using the spool valve, but we're going to use a dial indicator because this tractor has a hole right over the top of the spool valve where you can use a dial indicator. Some of the later model Selectamatics have a hole right there that allows you to put a dial indicator down on top of the spool valve. You can see it right there. I put my pointer stick down through that hole and you can see it sitting right on top of the spool valve. Okay, you can kind of see the setup I got going on here. Got a dial indicator attached and going down in that hole. Continuing on in the instructions, it says that later tractors have a plug at the rear of the axle cover plate to enable spool valve movement to be checked with a dial gauge. Remove the plug if it's there. Mine wasn't there, all I had was a gasket on top. Do the same process. Flick from TCU to height control and tighten the nut until movement on the dial indicator just ceases. Do not confuse a slight kick of the needle with an actual movement. If the needle kicks but returns to its original position, the valve is not actually moving. When the nut is set correctly, replace the control lever housing cover. All right, so let's see how we did. I haven't touched anything since we did it with our fingers. I want to see if it moves. It's jumping a little bit. We were right on target. All right, now I'm going to back it off and do it again. Not going to back it off too far. About right there. Did y'all see it move from 0 almost up to 10 as I was loosening the connecting link nut? Interesting. Now, there will be a little bit of movement of turning of the spool valve in there, and it may wander a little bit from what I understand. Oh, there's one thing that you need to know. Don't lean on the fender. If you've got your dial indicator set up on the fender, here, like I do, don't lean on it. Watch this. I think it moved it, right? Just sneak it up on it. Yeah, every time I was leaning on the fender, I was throwing it off some. One more little turn. May do it. Here we go. That's a slight kick of the needle. It's basically not moving. All right, I think I'm done. We're going to test it. I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but I used the friction disc nut to keep the control lever in the same position, 10 millimeters forward. There's just so much crowdedness right here, I couldn't use my rope to keep the handle back, so I tightened up the friction disc washer to where this wouldn't move. Wrong or right, that's what I did. All right, now it's loose. All right, we've got the control lever moving again. I'm going to put it down in the lower mode. Still in neutral. test it out. Good TCU mode. Raises. I want to see if I can hear the pump. I want to see if I can hear the pump relief valve. I can hear the engine bogging down when I push it all the way into select, but I still can't hear the pump relief valve. Hear the engine bogging? Oh well. See if it'll lower. It's going down. All right, let's try height control. Height control lowers at least. I can stop it. Yeah. Well, all three methods worked great. Listening for it, I couldn't hear the pump relief valve, but I did hear the tractor bog down. About the same, I guess. I don't know. I was able to use the technique of feeling it. I felt it with the index finger thumbnail. I felt it with the index finger fingernail to where the spool valve movement would just stop. And we used a dial indicator because this tractor had the hole on top of where the spool valve goes. So I've shown you all three techniques for adjusting the connecting nut here. And it all works. Yay! The next thing to do is to adjust the return spring. You do that with this nut right here. You push it forward in the slot basically until this stops, until the pump relief valve stops whining in all three modes, and tighten the nut up right there. We'll do that next. All right, this adjustment is all about this nut right here and the spring that's behind it down inside the quadrant, right in there. This is assuming the tractor is on. You've got this nut loosened off and pulled all the way back up against this slot right here. So you'll want to push this return spring right here forward until the whining noise of the pump relief valve stops. So basically you'll reach up in here. Let me do it like, what's a good angle for me to do this without messing with y'all? You'll basically move this up forward until the whining noise stops. You basically just want to get it to where when it comes into contact with the spring there, that it's not doing the little whining noise, but as soon as you pull it back against that spring, the pump relief valve will open, I think. Okay, let's try that. Once you get it to that position, tighten the spring carrier locking nut, which is that nut right there. And then we'll test it in all three selector positions to make sure that the whining noise or the engine bog doesn't happen in all three selector modes. All right, so let's get the tractor started and do those. You hear the tractor bogging right there? All right. me get it back down in an idle so you can possibly hear me. You can hear the tractor bogging. I still couldn't hear the pump relief valve opening. It may just be quiet, or I need to maybe do something with the pump. It may be about to go out. I don't know. I'll have to dive into that eventually, maybe. But I moved it up a little bit. I'm gonna rev it back up some. That seems to be pretty good. Okay, let's try height control. Well, I need to go forward just a little bit more. Pull it forward just a bit more. I think that's about right. All right, I think I've got this in a really good spot. It lowers. I don't hear the engine bogging. Again, I can't hear the pump relief valve. I can hear the engine struggling right there. I think that's in a good spot. All right, now for adjusting the friction disc. Select height control, raise and lower the linkage, check that the control lever stays in all lever positions, and the pump relief valve always closes when you slowly let the lever be pushed forward by the return spring. Tighten or loosen the lever pivot nuts as necessary. All right, your adjustment for your friction disc washer is right here. The nut closest to the quadrant is the one that tightens it up. You want it to where when you put it in a place, it stays in that place. It's basically a kind of a feel thing. I'm going to crank the tractor up and check that the control lever stays in all positions and that the pump relief valve always closes when you let the lever be pushed forward by the return spring. That's what this is what that means. When you let the lever be pushed forward by the return spring, pump relief valve closes or the engine stops bogging down when it does that. You hear the engine? Okay, that's fine. The engine quits bogging. I'm assuming the pump relief valve quits whining. All right, that feels pretty good to me. Let's try TCU. That works. Depth control works fine. Stays put wherever I put it. Once you've got this control lever in a place where you like it on this nut down here, screw this this other nut in place and lock it. Let's move on to adjusting the depth control cable. This is the last of the group 3 adjustments. Remove the top link if fitted and raise the linkage to full height. Make sure, tractor's on there. You got to raise it up all the way. Select depth control fully to the left, and then let the return spring push the lever forward to the hold position. Stop the tractor. Just turn it off. Then get up on the lower links, stand on them or put some weight on them, and then lengthen that outer cable until the links just start to lower. As soon as the links start to lower, shorten that cable from that position by 5 1/4 turns. For my tractor is a 990, I'll do it by 5 1/4 turns. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and select depth control here. I'm gonna raise the linkage to its top. Okay, we're all the way up. I'll turn the tractor off. And let's hope it stays up. So stay on the lower links, stand on the lower links, put some weight on the lower links, on the arms, and then lengthen the outer cable until the links just start to lower. By lengthen, it means to go that way. I'm going to lean on the arms a little bit, give it a little extra weight, so I can at least feel when it's starting to lower. Oh, there we go. It's lowering. Well, okay. Well, we know that works. Shorten the cable from this position by 5 1/4 turns. So I'm going to make a mark on top of it so I know what a turn is. Where's my Sharpie? That face is the top, right there, my black mark. All right, so we now need to go back that way, 5 1/4 turn. Means 1. All right, and that's 5. And now 1/4. Boom. There we go. Now there's another little nut back here. And that is not 7/16. That is 1/2 inch. It is a little lock nut that you run up against this little deal right here on the back of it. And just tighten it up against it to lock that into place. There we go. Depth control cable has been adjusted. All right, I got that cover back on. That one's back on. And I got the lowering control cover back on. All of them bolted up. It's just some screws, 4 screws for the covers and 2 screws for the top cover up there. That's all there is to it. It's time to go test this thing. Okay, I've got it hooked up to a disc. We're going to see if it'll pick it up. Here's hoping. All right, let's see what happens. This is in height control. It raises and lowers. Well, I think we're done with this one. The adjustments are complete. We've adjusted the cam plate, we've adjusted the connecting link 3 different ways, we've adjusted the return spring, and we have adjusted the depth control cable. I haven't tested out the depth control cable yet, but I will in the future. But I think this is done. Thanks for watching. Y'all have a good day.